let's dive right into main chunk of what I want to talk about today, which is the PA Democrats passing the Fairness Act. Now, some of you may already know this, but we'll take a little bit of a history lesson while we're here. In the 1960s, as we all are aware, there was the civil rights movement. And in 1964 and 1965, you had both the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, respectively, passed in those years. The Civil Rights Act in 1964 prevented federal discrimination based on race, religion, I believe sex, and color, a few other things. Vitally, what was left out of that today's society is gender and sexual orientation. What also, not vital to today necessarily, but at the time, which was overlooked and was, passed in future administrations, was people with disabilities, which there you also got the expansion of the Civil Rights Act. I believe in the 70s was the first time, and then in the 90s again, you get the Americans with Disabilities Act, which expands protections for people with disabilities. Now, we live in a country where there is no federal protection. There are no federal protections based on gender identity and sexual orientation or gender expression, gender orientation. All these, the phrasing of these words get legal real quick when you want to talk about this stuff. But specifically, sexual orientation, gender identity / expression are not protected classes based on the Civil Rights Act. Before we dive into what happened this week, let me quickly describe what it means to be a protected class. This is important to note because I'll just use it as an example. Okay, I'll use myself as an example so nobody can get upset. But a lot of people, a lot of right-wingers to be specific, like to say, oh, there's discrimination against white people or men or whatever, right? Because of intersectional feminism or because of Black Lives Matter or because of whatever reasoning they think that there is, right? So when we look at the reality of this, being within a protected class, so let's just use race for this example. I am a white man. If I were to be discriminated against because I am a white man, let's just say a job didn't want to hire me and an accounting firm didn't want to hire me, even though I'm a CPA, I have my accounting degree, I have experience. They just said, we don't want to hire you because you are white. Well, in America, because race is a protected class, you have protections federally from being discriminated against in employment, in housing, and in a few other different areas. And some of them are lackluster, but they exist. Okay. Now, I will put an asterisk here and say that there are always exceptions to these rules. So you might think, okay, well, what if I wanted to cast a certain person to like a certain actor, or let's even go more specific. I wanted to cast somebody to play Martin Luther King Jr. in a movie, and we want them to be African American. There are exceptions to discrimination laws to say, okay, these are carve-outs to say within reason, these are certain things that can happen. But on the whole, discrimination based on race, sex, religion are federally protected classes. So if you were fired wrongfully for being, as in my example, if I was fired for being white, or I wasn't hired for being white, or I wasn't able to go to a school for being white, or anything right like that, because race is a protected class, I'd be able to sue and receive damages and all that stuff, right? We all understand it. I think on the abstract, we talk about the Civil Rights Act and the rights era as my computer is freaking out. but protections created for African Americans specifically because they didn't have the same protections. They had, the separate but equal clause that was put in through the Jim Crow era, and the it wasn't was it Plessy versus Ferguson? Brown versus Board of Education, I believe. Actually, one of them was the one that implemented, one was the one that overturned it. But all that to say, needed these protections in the past for those reasons. We need them now and in the future for other classes and other reasons. First of all, being that the United States doesn't protect transgender, gay, bi, or any sort of queer identities in civil rights law. So what happens is it gets delegated down to the states. Now, many of you know, and we're obviously talking about Pennsylvania today, but I live in Pennsylvania, and this is a focus of the program. But in Pennsylvania, there are no protections from being fired, from housing discrimination, from a number of different things on a state level based on sexual orientation, gender expression. So, a lot of people that run for office run on this idea. Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're finally going to get it passed. Well, the Democrats finally took control, as we've talked about in past episodes, finally took control of the state house here in Pennsylvania. And they passed what they call the PA Fairness Act, which includes civil rights protections for sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. This is awesome. And I'm going to show you, here we have, this is the vote. Here's Malcolm Kenyatta, who led the effort on this with a few other state representatives. And also, I'll point out, there are former allies. Let's see. I want to see if he shouts them out here. Or they are allies. Here's Eric Gutschall, friend, not just of the show, but of mine. But yes, you see, like, Malcolm giving a shout out to Brian Sims, who was also interviewed on the program previously. The ACLU, the HRC. I believe it was Dan Frankel was one of the first people to propose this bill here in Pennsylvania. And he, once there were queer lawmakers that he could kind of pass the ball to and say, here, run with this, they finally did. And after years, Malcolm's been in there for years, Brian was there for years, they finally passed this bill. Here's the actual vote, right? Look at it. Awesome. 102 to 98. Now, does this mean that there are protections here in Pennsylvania now for gay individuals, for transgender individuals, for non-binary individuals? Unfortunately, the answer is no. Because we have a split Congress. If you think back to your Schoolhouse Rock days, the bill doesn't become a law until you get both the state or the Senate and the House and the governor, in this case the governor, to sign the bill into law. So, the state Senate, which is controlled by the Republicans, won't pass this. But it is still noteworthy to say we are inching closer. This is what good governance looks like. I commented that on Representative Tim Brennan, who I ran against in the primary against. I commented on his Facebook page. I said, this is what good governance looks like, because Democrats are leading the way and fighting for, instead of what Republicans are doing by stripping women of their reproductive rights, formerly constitutionally protected rights, rather than going after reproductive drugs that protect women, that protect trans men, that protect the right to choose in this country, that protect a constitutional right or a former constitutional right, the Republicans have stripped it back. Democrats in the state house and in the federal Congress eventually will stand up to expand rights for Pennsylvanians, for Americans, because everybody deserves to be treated fairly. Regardless of your gender expression or identity, regardless of your sexual orientation, this is a step in the right direction. This is the way to get things done. You pass it in the state house. We keep showing what we're standing for. And eventually, when the Democrats take the majority in the state Senate, there will be protections for our LGBTQ plus friends and family. It will happen. You have to believe it and you have to will it into existence, but you cannot just hope. You cannot just pray. You have to take action. You have to find somebody that you can invest time, money, effort into, get them elected, and fight for you. I will point out, if you, let's just say you don't have the money, you can't go, you can't find the way to contact your state representative somehow. It's easy. You should go do that. But if you can't, maybe your state representatives are Republican and they just don't want to have anything to do with it. Here's what you do. You care about expansion of civil rights, go to your local government. Every local municipal government has the right to ban discrimination beyond what the Civil Rights Act proposes and protects. So, for example, if you were someone like me back in 2019, or former guest of the show, Dan Wood, who is a township supervisor in Doylestown Township, guess what? There are no protections in that municipality for people in the LGBTQ plus community solely based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, if you went where I live now, Doylestown Borough, there are protections for those in that community and in that group and in those classes more broadly. Because the Doylestown Borough government, Democratic. Doylestown Township one is Republican. So you can see with two towns, actually, I mean, Doylestown Township actually engulfs Doylestown Borough. If you live on one side of the street, you can be discriminated against. If you live on the other, you cannot. You have the protections that you deserve. That is the way that you can go and make things happen. Now, if you live in New Jersey or you live in certain states that have these protections, that's great. But if you don't, and you should look up, if your state has protections, if the state won't pass them, your local government should. And if your local government won't, then you should run for your local government, or you should find somebody to unseat those people and run on that issue. Make it an issue. Gay conversion therapy is not banned in Doylestown Township, I'll have you know. Something that I ran on in 2019. Making sure that we protect LGBTQ individuals and the community at large. Children that are trying to be taught that somehow it's grooming to just say it's okay to be who you are, but if we tell you that you have to repent and you are, put into gay conversion therapy, that is not grooming. That is ridiculous. So get involved locally, as the show is a big advocate for. Find the pinpoint in which you can pressure your local government, talk with your local township manager, the borough manager, somehow make it happen. Just Google your local government and you can do it. You can really get this thing done.